Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Product School webinar. Thanks for joining us today. Just in case you didn't know, Product School offers product management certificates online and at our 20 campuses worldwide. On top of that, every week we offer some amazing local product management events and host online webinars, live streams, and Ask Me Anything sessions. Head over to productschool.com after this webinar to check them out.
Hi everyone, I'm Khushbu Jha, and today we will talk about product management in a startup setting. So it could be an intrapreneur setting where you're launching a new business or feature within a larger company, or it could be an entrepreneur setting where you are a startup CEO or a product lead at a startup. And I think those two scenarios are very similar because you're resource constrained. You're also trying to build something new without precedent. So talking about product management, in my opinion, product management starts way before the actual product starts. So way before you have a feature or an app that you're working towards. It starts with market research. The first thing that you work on is what is the problem you are solving? What are the products out there? How does your product fit into the larger universe? Who are the other players right now and potential in future? So, for example, if you're launching something in e-commerce, the obvious question people ask is, what is preventing Amazon from entering this business? Because you're doing e-commerce. But it may already be there. And if it's not, it may enter the market in the future. That's true for all other industries as well. Then the second most important thing, and this is the core of our presentation today, is customer empathy. It is important to understand what is the problem that you're really solving. What is the gap that you intend to solve? And does the customer want it solved? Or what do you do if the answer is the customer really doesn't care? For every problem, there has to be a current substitute. What are people doing about it right now? When there was no TV, people were probably spending time on the radio or going out and watching theater, but they're filling that need with something. It is important to spend time understanding the customer because sometimes what you would discover is the first set of customers that your leading hypothesis says you're solving for may actually not be the best suited for the product. They seem like the people with the problem, but they may end up not being the best customers for that solution. Instead, sometimes adjacent personas may be better suited for the initial product hypothesis. And so it's important to build also with flexibility. The other thing about customer interaction and empathy is do not overinterpret positive customer reactions when you are early on in your product and you're trying to talk to people about your idea and you speak passionately about it. Chances are they will be encouraging. They would think very highly because you're liking your own idea, you're passionate about it. And of course, you can talk to like 10, 15 people that may or may not be a right sample size or enough sample size. Stakeholder engagement. This is the third thing that is often overlooked, especially in the early stages of product development. It's assumed stakeholder management is about managing large cross-functional teams, mostly associated with dysfunctional teams that don't get along with each other. But stakeholder management and engagement is very crucial even in the early product phase. If you are launching a new business, or if you're a startup trying to disrupt a space, you have to be cognizant of the key players that you're going to disrupt the process and the system for. Are you challenging the status quo? Would you expect a backlash? If yes, if you're a startup, you might also want to think of creative ways to incorporate these agents that you're going to disrupt in your process. Engage with them. There's an old saying, if you can't beat them, join them. And as an early startup, you clearly can't beat the incumbents. So it's important to make sure that you have thought about creative ways of how you could kind of leverage them, at least in the initial stages, so that the disruption is only process and not people disruption. Moving on, the other most important thing to realize is the product isn't really the goal. The solving of the problem is. It is very important to understand what's the context in which your customers will use the product. What is the benefit? If you were talking about Alexa as a product, for example, I use Alexa at home quite a bit. And if you're thinking about it, it's important to know, would customers just keep the device in a corner? Would it sit in the living room at the center of the table? Will customers look at it when speaking to it? Would customers want to go touch and play with the buttons because that's what you are used to with your phone and other devices? Um, it is usually in the kitchen or living room versus bedroom, and accordingly you would design the features of the actual product. And so context is super important in which your customers are going to use that product. um, the next most important thing is to determine the most important problem. We use minimum viable product to almost like an excuse to say, hey, this is an MVP, what do you expect? Of course it's scrappy. um, but bottom line is it is sometimes just crappy. Minimum viable product is not a subset of things customer want. It is definitely not the easiest subset to build and launch. It is the most important problem in the group of problems that you're trying to solve. If it was a taxi app, for example, um, one of the problems you could say is core to your customer is getting a reliable taxi within a certain time. So when I book the taxi, I know it will take 5 minutes or 15 minutes or 30 minutes, and I can plan my trip to the airport accordingly. But that's my core problem because in a regular taxi, there's no guarantee I'll get it in 1 minute or 30 minutes. And so that may be the core problem. Not suggesting that's what Uber is solving, but that could be a core problem. And then all your features would be around it. So whether or not I can pay through cash or tap, whether or not I can track the car, whether or not I can call or text or give ratings is all secondary. The most important thing is that when you tell me it will arrive at my doorstep at 5 minutes, will it arrive in 5 minutes? Because that is my core thing. As long as you solve the core problem, customers would be very forgiving about all the fringe problems that they have, and they would like solved, but can wait for it. They will forgive you and let you build through the versions. It is also a good check to ask your customers what their willingness to pay is. Chances are, if you're solving the real core problem, more often than not, they would be willing to pay some money for it. But quite often, startups would build a product and hoping that the customers would pay. When the customers aren't quite paying, they're like, hey, we are a freemium model. Let's build all of these bells and whistles. And then the customer would pay. But as long as you haven't solved the real problem and have solved all the ancillary problems, customers are not going to pay. Moving on to the next thing. We talk a lot about MVPs as a startup, um, and we often get stuck in the discussion around MVP, but it is equally important to describe the North Star and talk about the North Star all the time, because North Star is effectively your where you want to be in terms of the customer problems. In the case of taxi app, you want to be able to reliably predict the time the taxi will take to get your doorstep. You want to be most of the times able to service the customer. You want to make it hassle free for the customer to book the cab. You want to make it maybe voice enabled so you can call a cab through Alexa. All of that stuff. But then the MVP has to be on the same path as the North Star. You cannot say that the MVP solves a different problem because it's an MVP. And so it is important to constantly reiterate what your North Star is so that you are not deviating on the path. Because as you're building a new product or when you're launching a startup, it's very easy to get sidetracked. And you get a ton of advice as well, like, hey, it would be good to be this, it would be good to be this. But if you have your North Star identified, then you'll probably stick to what you started with. When I say that, I do not mean that you shouldn't be flexible, uh, but flexible on execution is not the same thing as flexible on vision. Vision is where you don't compromise. Execution is where you try different things. The next thing is tenets or guidelines or guiding principles. I feel like this is something that every organization and team has, but most don't use it. It's something that's on the website, in the charter, somewhere documented at the beginning or end of every document, but nobody really uses it. So, what are tenets? Tenets are guidelines that will help you make decisions. And it should not only be at the company level, but also at the product team level. Because this is what will enable every member on the team to make those decisions confidently without every decision requiring all of the team to get together and discuss and debate it out. For example, a tenet could be that we are not going to compromise on accuracy um, for anything. And then you come up with this new feature, very fancy, based on customer research, that will increase the performance speed of the app by 2x, but it will reduce the error rate by 0.5%. Should you build it? 2x seems quite a lot, but if your tenant says that we are not going to compromise on accuracy or errors at any cost, then it's an obvious choice. So that's another one that you should have listed out and you should use it. Goals and metrics. Goals and metrics are often associated with large corporates reporting, documenting, but they are also important early on because they provide a clear gating criteria and help you decide the go no go decisions. It would be impractical to define all metrics at day zero, but goals and metrics for the first two phases should be in sight and a clear hurdle rate or a grading criteria. For example, if on your app the speed of onboarding is a goal of your product as part of a hassle-free customer experience, the MVP could be to onboard in 7 steps, and phase one could be to do in 3 steps. But if it is part of your vision, if it's part of your goal, then it has to be measured. The next thing to remember is that just like the product itself is not about the feature, but the whole problem solving, it is also about the whole experience that the customer has. Because the customer interaction with a company is almost like, I hate to use the very cliched example, like dating. It starts with first impression. It then goes on to honesty. It's then, okay, when we get married, how you treat me, and when I'm down, how you support me, and when there are issues, how you amicably resolve it. And it would be right from the first click, so to say. It's not like the customers don't realize when there's a clickbait that takes them to your website, because very soon they'll be like, oh, you got me here by cheating. I was not intending to be here, and I was not intending to buy from you. And so it's important how you bring the inbound referrals, and it should not be clickbait because that doesn't convert. The next thing is terms transparency. Increasingly in the online world, there is no agent, no selling agent who says, "Hey, these are the terms and conditions. This is what it means, and this is where you need to sign." When you go to a bank, the banker usually explains you terms and conditions, but gives you then a 20-page document to sign. I'm not saying that we don't need the 20-page document. Of course we do. Those are the detailed terms and conditions that are legally binding, and the customers most of the times don't read it. They just click accept. You know that. I do that. I'm sure most people do that. However, if you really mean to be transparent and honest to your customers, then you would have both versions. You would have the detailed legal version, But you would also spell out very clearly during the whole customer interaction process, whether it's a purchase experience or it is a usage experience, what the terms are. So if there's a return term where you say, hey, we will accept returns only if you send it back in 15 days, and by the way, we don't pay the cost for returns, I should know that before I'm buying. And in simple terms, and not in a legal document hidden somewhere in the fine print. The next one is after sales response and proactivity. After sales response is often limited to mature products where people have a lot of time. But in the MVP or the early stages of a product, it is even more important because chances are your early product is pretty not awesome or crappy. Being humble will help. Reach out to your customers, take their feedback, tell them what you are already working on for the next version, and thank them for new ideas. You will be surprised how many good ideas can come from early users and super users. When we were launching the Hazmat marketplace on Amazon, we reached out to sellers on a very regular basis, and not just for for testing, but just discussing. Hey, this is what we are trying to do. Does it solve your problem? And they gave us tons of insights that we could leverage over time. They actually bailed us out with their ideas on every time we got stuck. We just went to our customers and they were like, oh, but you can do this and this will solve half of my problem. And that's how we built out, basically engaged with them as our thought partners. The next one is follow-up emails and spam. Follow-up emails are usually spam. We're trying to cross-sell, upsell, sell more to existing customers. We're trying to increase the customer lifetime value by trying to sell them even more. Most of the times, it's just spam. If you're an early feature or product and an MVP stage, don't. Most of the times you will not have much to upsell or cross-sell, but if you do, just abstain because it can only cause churn. Early product is definitely not for spam selling. It is for handheld, high touch, customer feedback version of selling. And then the last but then not least, and something that we are probably all very familiar with, is customer support. Most successful companies have tons of customer service success stories. Zappos has quite a few stories. Amazon has its stories. In all of these cases, the product or the customer problem, all the way up to the CEO, is taken very seriously. Whether it's the CEO and the C-suite at Zappos, whether it's Jeff Bezos at Amazon, they all are very into the customer service side. And that's not saying that somebody reports to them with her analysis and the insight. They listen in firsthand. Customers can actually email Jeff Bezos directly, and if they complain, somebody on the team has to solve the problem. But they listen in to actual customers because what you will get from reporting and insights is data and hard numbers, but you are not able to capture the emotion involved, and a lot of decisions customer make isn't always driven by data. Finally, when you're launching a new product or feature, you will have a ton of unknowns. If you're an entrepreneur, you'll have a bunch of fallacies that you need to avoid. When you're launching, you'll feel that the thousands of customers that are using a product feature, so it must be a good feature, and therefore you can pick up stuff from it. Well, the idea of a new business is to disrupt, so take everything with a pinch of salt. Same is true for things like pricing model. You assume that if it is bringing in sales and revenues, chances are it is optimized. When we were working on a trade-in model at Amazon, the pricing wasn't optimized for used products, so it just didn't work for us. And you have to question each time there is a pricing model or an existing financial model that seems to work perfectly for another part of business. And the third and the biggest fallacy often is no need to do market research because there's tons of data. Large companies have tons of data, and you can cut and slice and dice the data in every manner that you want. And from every perspective, you'll get some insight, and they'll be great insights, and they'll tell you a lot about the customers. They'll tell you about a lot of things that the customers want. But the recommendation here is just go and speak to the customer rather than just looking at the data and building models around it. If you're a startup entrepreneur, I think some of the fallacies to avoid are try not to leverage existing processes, assuming they're standard industry practice. Extrapolating, as we talked about earlier, is the biggest trap. The first set of customers are not going to be representative of all the mass customers. So extrapolating non-representative customers is not going to get you good results. And the third one is opposite of fallacy two. So you believe in a hypothesis. You have a leading hypothesis. So now you're looking for data to validate that hypothesis, and therefore you're assuming that the customer feedback that's not in line is actually an outlier. That could be a miss because, as we discussed earlier, sometimes you go in with a leading hypothesis, assuming that a certain customer segment is your best segment, and then over time you will actually realize that it is not the core segment that your product is best suited for, but there's an adjacent persona or adjacent customer segment that actually benefits way more from your product and is way more excited than you initially thought. So keep all feedback in mind because your leading hypothesis is only as good as the customer data that you have on hand. That's all for today. Thank you. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn.